That music would wake the dead to get the heart going. You.
Quite the introduction to get us going.
That's an old one now. I keep threatening to update that, but the old bit of diddly eye will get you going.
You're gonna have to swap out the turtleneck for your stories and sips jumper.
Maybe times are changing. I'm showing a little bit more neck, less conservative. You're all very welcome to the Shebeen. I'm Barry, and this is Lauren. Whichever way you're looking at this way. How are you getting on?
The very best, yes. I'm doing great. I have a little drop of cologne in my glass tonight, rum and raisin, one of my favourite releases from them. So what's in your glass? I see it cologne in front of you as well.
Yeah, I've got our Stories and Sips club release. Still to date, the only 4-year-old release ever to come out of Cologne. It's the second ever cask they produced. And still I see more Bar and Tools coming out, but none of 4 years yet, just ours, but lovely drop. I'm only drinking club whiskies tonight. The next one up is the end of, well, not quite the end. If that's the end, if I get through that, we might have to go to the doctor. But that's the Cliffs of Moher single malt Pedro Jimenez cask that we released last year. So I'm only drinking those two because our club releases, because I'm going to talk about our next Stories and Sips club release this evening as well. But we've loads of things to talk about tonight. Wait, have you got other whiskies as well? Or are you just drinking the Cologne?
No, I have Cologne, but just an FYI, everyone, this is not sponsored by Brandon Carty, in case you're wondering. He hasn't chipped in to support for our technical issues. So Cologne Rum and Raisin is up first, and then I have Rider's Tears in a Skillen ice wine finish is lined up next. And depending how the night goes, I may pull another one off the shelf behind me. We shall see.
If you've just joined us, you're welcome to the Shebeen, and almost weekly, depending on whether we remember to turn up or not, effort at talking about Irish whiskey and all things Irish whiskey community. If you're new here, this is as formal as it gets. You'll note how unrehearsed it is. You'll marvel at the lack of preparation that has gone in to each week, but we do it anyway. And we'd love an old click on the like button, share button. If you're part of any Facebook groups or communities or online communities you think would benefit from joining in the crack around Irish whiskey, feel free to share this. That's all we ask. That's the cost of entry. An old like or a click or a share or something like that. We're going to talk tonight about stories, tales, tastes. We were talking during the week about what we wanted to cover, and I was reminded how much of Irish whiskey is story oriented. There's a reason my business is called Stories and Sips. It's because I think every sip has a story, every taste has a tale, and it's those stories and those tales that I think we connect to before we ever connect to the whiskey. It might be the story of the people, the place, ultimately the pour, but we all build connections and relationships based on those stories. So when we were talking during the week, we said we have to dive into that, didn't we?
Absolutely. And I think, a great whiskey is a bonus and is usually just testament to the history and the brand behind it, really, and the stories and the people that have passed on the legacy of a brand from generation to generation. So, I mean, really, without the kind of storytellers in the industry, we might not really have such a fantastic industry that we do today. So, behind every great whiskey is an even better story.
It's what got me connected or more deeply involved in Irish whiskey, was discovering the stories, realizing the depth of information, of history, of legacy, of interpersonal relationships and connectivity that exists within the world of Irish whiskey going back generations and generations. And as I started reading up on those stories going back 6-7 years ago, I just wanted to tell people and share with them the story I'd heard. And I knew if I did, they'd be more connected. And over the years, as I've done hundreds of tastings over the last few years, the things that resonate most are, and people come up and talk about it afterwards, is I never knew this about that county, or I never knew this about the whiskey, or I never knew this about that person. And obviously you need the whiskey in the glass, but without the stories behind it, we'd just be something maybe a little bit more manufactured,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really resonates with people and they can really connect with a brand that has a really exciting story. And I mean, even tonight, we're not just focusing specifically on brands and their stories, but more kind of the industry itself and kind of the characters and the kind of people that have, I guess, played a part in not the growth necessarily, but yeah, the overall story and the picture of the industry.
If you have a favorite story from the world of whiskey, feel free to share it in the comments throughout the night. Maybe it's something that we will already be covering tonight, or maybe it's something we decide that's a great story. We should share that tonight, and we should dive into it ourselves. So let us know in the comments if you have a favorite story around the world of Irish whiskey, from history, from past, from the present. I doubt you have any stories from the future yet, or you're in the wrong place. You should be in the old mind reading live stream tonight. But we're going to dive into a few of those. But before we do that, we're going to talk about some new whiskey releases. And we will, as always, if you've got any questions at any time, throw them into the chat. We'll take any questions. And if we can't answer them, we'll make up the answer. Or we'll find the answer between now and next week and give you the answer on Irish whiskey. So it was 2 weeks ago we were here last for the halfway to St. Patrick's Day.
That's right, 2 weeks ago. Yeah, because I was thinking when you played the intro there, I was like, this sounds different from Tartan Riot a few weeks ago.
Yeah, that seems like a lifetime ago now. But yeah, so we're 5.5 months away from St. Patrick's Day then. So it was halfway to St. Patrick's Day 2 weeks ago. 5.5 months away, and our next whiskey bus around our Irish whiskey bus takes place around St. Patrick's Week, March 2024. Almost sold out on that, down to the last couple of places on our whiskey bus. If you want to join us, let us know. If you want to join us for a week-long trip to Ireland, let us know. We're doing that next year. And lots of things being planned as well. Lauren, our next Irish whiskey experience, our next in-person event takes place in a place close to your heart in the not-too-distant future.
My turf, yeah. Yeah, so we are planning we're doing a Belfast whiskey weekend. So this is kind of the guinea pig really of what our kind of whiskey weekend model might look like later next year, kind of going down the line. So on the 4th of November, we will be savouring Belfast's distilling delights. Of course, distilling has been brought back to the city for the first time in almost 90 years. In the recent months, literally about 2 months ago at this stage now, with the opening of Titanic Distillers in the iconic Titanic Pump House, of course in the Titanic Quarter of the city. And then we'll also have another distillery to enjoy in Crumlin Road Jail, the A wing of Crumlin Road Jail, of course that being McConnell's Irish whiskey. So we will be the first group, the first ever public group to go into Crumlin Road Jail and McConnell's new distillery and see the stills. So the first ever public group, which is amazing. Absolutely cannot wait for that. Of course, Sarah Kennedy is a great friend of mine, so it's great to be able to support her and the journey that she's been on with the brand. So we'll be doing that as one of our experiences, and then the guys at Titanic are also opening their doors wide for us to go in and have a little taste of the first single malt new make spirit to be distilled in Belfast in 87 years, which is amazing. So we're literally going to taste a little piece of liquid history there as well, which is unbelievable. And then to round off the day, as if that wasn't enough, we will be enjoying a private tasting from the great team from Two Stacks, privately upstairs in the Duke, with a pint in hand, no doubt, and a whiskey in the other. So it's going to be fantastic. Cannot wait. So we're very nearly sold out of that as well, actually. I think we're about 70% now, which is fantastic. So if anyone's in Ireland, if anyone's over from the US in Ireland, you're more than welcome to join us, or anyone locally, you better click that book button.
I think a few of the crowd here tonight would be well advised to just find a last minute flight in November. Come on over, join us. We'll give you VIP seating if you make the trip. The person who comes the furthest, if anybody comes from the United States, I would personally reward them with a bottle of whiskey for their trouble, as if that's going to cover the cost of flight. But come on over. What are you waiting for? Listen, take a break. You can't work your whole lives. You can't work your whole life.
We're getting to first, you know. Tony's just asked the Titanic Distillery near the Titanic Experience. It is, Tony. It's pretty much just down the road, about a 5 to 10 minute walk, very, very close by. So obviously that area has such an interesting maritime history. And Titanic distillers are really leaning into that as well. And they believe that they are the only Irish whiskey, if certainly the only Irish whiskey, but possibly the only whiskey in the world that they'll be aging a few casks underneath sea level, below sea level, which is amazing. So it's just filled with history, and I can't wait for everyone to see it. So it'll be great.
Yeah, Dave. We are talking to you, Dave. You're a man who wouldn't want to miss out on something, and a man who'd be liable to press buy now on the old ticket link if we put it under your nose.
I mean, listen, when was I in New York? When were we in New York? February? Yeah. My flights were about $390 return. I know
Mark's got flights there, look.
You're not New York, but listen, it wasn't expensive. It's worth it, you know. Do it.
It's not every weekend you get to enjoy Lauren's Belfast. So Lauren's also going to be, what she didn't tell you is she's going to be leading us on a little bit of a whiskey walk on Sunday morning, and there's going to be a few surprises along the way there too. So it's going to be a good old weekend in Belfast. Anyway, no pressure, but we'd love to see you there. Special welcome will be given to anybody who makes the trip across the Atlantic. A very special welcome. You'll be heroed. You'll be carried through the streets of Belfast like Cleopatra, and it'll be a marvelous weekend.
It's the only time I'm allowing people to follow me around the streets of Belfast from pub to pub, so you don't get that offer every weekend.
And she won't call the police if you follow her around the city. She won't call them the thing. Tom says $450 return right now. Listen, $450 to be some of the first people inside Titanic Distillers and McConnell's Crumlin Road Jail for private tastings with the head distillers, and we've got some surprises in store in a couple of those locations too. Anyway, enough of this. We will not be begging you to turn up on our doorstep. This goes ahead with or without you. It's going to be a great time. It's going to be a great time. IrishWhiskeyExperiences.com is where you go to book your ticket if you do want to come. And if you are going to make the trip, let us know, and we will make sure to take good care of you. All right. What have we got coming up next? What are we starting with here? New releases, I think. Or was there something else I was going to talk about? I can't remember. Anyway, Belfast is going to be great. So Irish Whiskey Experiences, that's where you go to check out the tickets. And in the meantime, I am going to add this here. And I think Lauren has frozen on me. Bum, 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 bum. Okay. We're going to take off this banner. Sleep rough, no hotel. New releases. So let me see here if you can all hear me. Lauren has frozen. She's gone. Lauren's gone. She's ditched. That's the end of it. No more. All right, we're going to keep moving on. We had a good run with her. She can't be relied upon. She can't be relied upon. Honest to God now, if we don't get better Wi-Fi up in your part of the country, we're abandoning. Listen, we've had a good run. It's been a nice few months working together. That's the end of it.
Sinead, listen. As I said, this is not sponsored by Brendan Carty or anyone else for our technical issues here. My laptop hates StreamYard. The only time it ever does this is when I'm on this platform. So we will move. I have my phone on standby in case it happens again. I'm just going to use my phone.
I like you say, this is the only time it happens when you're on this. It's the only one you do, so it's happening 100% of the time.
Listen. It doesn't like the platform. Anyway.
The Belfast Whiskey Weekend will be equally snag-free, so rest assured there'll be no similar issues.
There's no technology required for a weekend in Belfast, so we're okay. As long as I have me and you have me, I'll be fine.
There's a few new whiskies. We've talked about them in our Facebook community, Irish Whiskey Fans of America. You're all part of different groups and communities, and lots of information gets shared. The world of Irish whiskey is moving at breakneck speed at the moment. It's tough to keep up with everything. We'll talk about a few releases. Let us know if we've missed any. They come thick and fast. And honestly, there's a lot of releases don't get announced, just go straight to shelves. I see things popping up that came from shelves in the United States and nobody knew anything about. Anyway, if we know of them, we'll talk about them. If they're interesting enough, we'll talk about them. If they're just bottom of the shelf blends that make their way to a supermarket chain in the south of Spain and that's it, I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of interest in that personally. I don't think many people do either here. But if it's interesting to you, let us know and we'll talk about it. But lots of talk about the Redbreast Tawny Port, which was released. I think that was released since we were last here. I'm pretty sure it was in the 2 years since we've last streamed. And this one is making its way across the United States. Fairly limited quantities, I would say, a bit like Redbreast PX. And it's on shelves in many of the locations where you found Redbreast PX. Don't ask me what states it's in. Redbreast themselves can't tell me. And that's a challenge. So the company is so big, Pernod Ricard, distribution is so disconnected from marketing that knowing where to send you all is just near impossible. And that's one of the unfortunate things about a market the size of the United States. In any case, that's on shelves right now. It is the second in their Iberian series after Redbreast PX. Incidentally, Redbreast PX, which was launched 2 years ago, has just made a second arrival in the United States, batch number 2. That was unexpected. It was unannounced. It just dripped out there. I got a little bit of a head start kind of warning that it was coming. I did let you know that there might be a drop of it coming. That's also hitting shelves around the United States as well. So look, pick them up if you see them. If you're Redbreast fans, pick them up. $99 is what you should be paying. If you see it at $200, you're being robbed. You're being gouged. What can we do about it? Not a whole lot about it. Some states will keep to certain pricing. I think we saw it as low as $89.99 in Boston today. So see what you can find. Anyway, worth checking out. Perhaps I will say that of the 3 that have formed the Iberian series, so Redbreast Listau was kind of opted in, almost like the prequel, and then Redbreast PX, and now Tawny Port. For me, Tawny Port would be maybe the third of the 3. I would have put maybe PX first and Listau second. Not that you need to compare them all; they're all very different whiskies. But to me, it's not as fortified wine rich. A little bit more, a little shorter, a little thinner, a little bit more kind of pencil shavings-y, almost like cherry notes that to me slightly left of center for Redbreast. But that's just my own personal preference. Some of you might taste it and love it. What's the going rate on the PX? Go ahead, Lauren.
No, I think I saw someone you were saying about pricing and how varied it can be from state to state. I'm pretty sure there was someone in the group during the week shared a bottle and it was a crazy price for the Tawny. I think it was like $149 or something, if it jogs my memory. Unbelievable.
We've seen north of that. We've seen 200, 299. Crazy pricing.
Crazy.
I don't know. Personally, I wouldn't pay $299 for it, folks. But again, everyone's pocketbook is different. Redbreast PX, you should be seeing this for around the same price. It was around the same when it landed in the US. I think $120, $119, maybe 2 years ago, if I remember correctly. That to me is a $120 whiskey all day long. And if I could find it $120 today, I'd buy cases and cases of it. Honestly, if the only Redbreast I could ever drink going forward is Redbreast PX, I'd be very, very happy. Maybe my favorite Redbreast of that price range that you just love to have as a daily sipper. I think I'm all out of it. The sad day in the parish. Okay. And then there's another Redbreast that we can talk about as well, and that is a distillery exclusive. 10-year-old Redbreast, single pot still, kind of a low ABV, 43%, 120 euros, not cheap. You can get it personalized with your name on it for another €5, so 125 euros. You can have your name on the label, and you can only pick that up at the distillery in Middleton or at the Jameson Bow Street Experience in Dublin. And I think that follows the trend of having exclusives available for people who arrive physically in person. It's commonplace in all across Scotland and Kentucky, of course. Irish distilleries have been rolling it out as well. And up until now, the only Redbreast distillery exclusive has been a north of €300 a bottle, 19 years old or 20 years old or 21 years old. So it's nice to see that there is a little bit lower price point. Again, you're going to have to decide if that's worth it. You can get a 12-year-old Redbreast for €65. But again, for as long as we buy them, they'll keep making them. As simple as that. As simple as that.
I think there was a little bit of disappointment as well that the ABV had dropped in that one.
Yeah.
Down to 43. I saw on the group during the week.
So this is a very different whiskey to the 10-year-old that looks the same on the label that was released back in 2020. It's a very different whiskey. Again, the ABV is different. It's not cask strength, and the composition of it is different. This includes Pedro Jimenez casks, European Virgin Oak casks, ex-bourbon barrels, and Oloroso sherry casks as well. We're getting the official press release on this tomorrow, so I'll share the details on that then. Incidentally, the interest in Redbreast is off the charts globally. I posted a little video about this online 2 days ago, and it's had 60,000 views. 60,000 views, which is incredible. So there's unbelievable interest. And what's interesting is how many people are looking at whiskey today as an investment, as a collector's item. And the most asked question under that video was, is this worth picking up for investment? Is this worth holding on to? Which is a sign of the market, but a tricky old position for distillers to be in and distilleries to be figuring out, are they making things for sale or are they making things for glass cabinets? It's a tough one.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it causes it's a kind of a bit of a delicate talking point, I think, among the whiskey community as well, about people kind of collecting bottles. A lot of people think, well, what use is it sitting in a bottle not being enjoyed, so it kind of is that very divisive sort of opinion.
But here's what we'll do. In the interests of our community and for the sake of our community, I will go to the distillery and I will buy a bottle of this. I will feed that animal that is the machine that keeps on churning out great whiskey, and I'll go and taste it and test it. But I'm only doing this because I care, right? I'll go down to the distillery tomorrow. Incidentally, it is worth noting that the distillery has undergone a €25 million year-and-a-half long redevelopment of its visitor experience. The Jameson experience now has turned into the Middleton Distillery experience in Middleton, and the old visitor centre is gone, and a €25 million multimedia exhibition space experience is now in place. I'm going to go and check it out this week, probably tomorrow, and report back. But it's designed to encompass more of the brands. So it's not, obviously, a distillery. One of the big problems I always had with the Middleton experience was that it was always just a Jameson experience, yet they toured you around an old distillery that had never had any connection with Jameson whatsoever. It was the old Cork Distilleries Company. Jameson was never made there. None of the Jameson family, to the best of my knowledge, had ever been there, seen it, heard of it. But back in the day, but you were doing a Jameson experience and being toured around a distillery that made Paddy and Hewitt's whiskey and Middleton whiskey, but never made Jameson. So the new experience is designed to give you a more holistic overview, I think, of all of the brands, Method and Madness and Powers and Napogue and the spot whiskies, Middleton Very Rare, and so on. So we'll check that out and we'll get back to you on that. Okay. Another release here. I don't have a whole lot of information on this, but that is a Whistler. The Whistler 10-year-old. This is a 10-year-old single malt. It's a single cask exclusive released for the Marion Hotel. So the Marion Hotel is a 5-star hotel in Dublin. One of the when I was studying hotel management back in the 1990s, the Marion Hotel opened, and it opened to such fanfare. Never had such luxury been seen in Ireland. I remember when I was studying hotel management, I used to have a little red notebook, and I used to bring this little red notebook around with me to hotels. I'd make little notes of amazing things I saw in hotels, And I remember noting, because I got a tour of the Marion Hotel in 1996, and Lauren, you were but a baby. And I got a tour of the Marion Hotel, and I remember making a note in my notebook that how amazed I was that every room had a fax machine. I was like, wow, that's amazing. Anyway, the Marion Hotel is also home to the, for the longest time, Ireland's only two Michelin star restaurant, Patrick Guibo, in the basement of the Marion Hotel. And it's a fantastic hotel, beautiful, stunning hotel. Anyway, they now have their own exclusive Whistler whiskey, which was sourced from Boan Distillery. They shared press releases, no shortage of press releases. However, none of the press releases gave any indication of price, which can tell us only one thing: if we have to ask, we can't afford it. 43, maybe it's not 43% ABV. I couldn't find the ABV on the bottle. I looked at everything. It wasn't on the press release either. But it was more of a press release kind of talking about the amazing Marion Hotel, amazing whiskey, Irish whiskey. Anyway, if this is your thing, some of you are Whistler fans, go check it out. I haven't had a chance to try it. I haven't had a chance.
What would be the equivalent of a fax machine in every hotel room today? Like what's that upgraded to now for a 5-star? Great coffee machine? No? Who knows?
I don't know. Steve says if you're going to Middleton tomorrow, you might as well get a few bottles of Powers John's Lane cask strength that's being released tomorrow as well. Steve, I've had a bottle of that on my shelf for the last 3 years, 2.5 years, and I also got a bottle of the Palace release there 2 weeks ago, which I need to pick up at the soonest opportunity. It's a nice whiskey, but I happen to think Powers John's Lane non-cask strength is better than the Powers John's Lane cask strength. That's my own personal opinion. But you look, the beauty of buying a cask strength bottle is you get to decide what ABV you want to bring it down to yourself. As simple as that. All right, those are the 3 releases. If there's any more that we missed, let us know. And the big news is just the Middleton Distillery new experience that's opened without a whole lot of fanfare. I think they've been under a lot of pressure to get that place open, and very quietly they opened their doors and on yesterday morning, and yeah, it's all systems go now. So that's great.
Can't wait to see it, actually.
Yeah, I know. I'm curious to see how they encompass all the other brands within the story now, or whether it's just a gift shop that looks good. I don't know. I doubt it is. I'm sure it's a great experience, but I'm very curious.
I'm kind of visualizing, like, if they're trying to tell the story of so many brands, would it be similar to, the Guinness Storehouse, the way they have the story of Arthur Guinness and his family and all his kids, kind of like an immersive sort of display on the walls, and that's kind of what I'm picturing. So, well, you can report back tomorrow if I'm right or wrong.
I know. All right. So that's the news. Should we talk about a few tales and a few tastes?
I think we should. Some of these are obviously fact, and they're ingrained in the Irish whiskey history story. Others, you can decide for yourself.
Lauren, do you? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell a story back and forth. Lauren's going to share a little story of interest. I'm going to share a little story of interest. Lauren's going to share a story. And over the next 18, 19 hours, we're going to get through about 47,000 stories. And you'll be dropping off like flies as we get through these stories. But they're all connected to Irish whiskey. They're all interesting to us. If they're not interesting to you, don't tell us. Just applaud when there are interesting things and tell us we're amazing. And then if you don't like the story, just pour more whiskey and just nod and go, okay, all right, okay, not for me.
The more you drink, the better we sound and the more interesting we are. So keep topping up those glasses.
I do find this about Lauren. The more we drink, the more interesting her stories get. This is the fact.
Very funny, thank you. I've got some great stories lined up here. What do you mean?
That's great. So you're all talk. You can take the first story. That's fine.
Just as I had a sip of whiskey, you spring that on me. Are you not up? I thought you were. Are you going first or am I going first?
You can go first. You can find one of your stories that you like there from your list, and if you want to put something on the screen, you're welcome to,
Do you know what? I'll start off with one that's a little bit more lighthearted, shall we? And then we'll dive into some that are maybe a little bit more, maybe have a little bit more weight to them. Let's just say. As I said, some of these stories that we've picked to share tonight, they're all very interesting in their own way. Some are definitely true, and some, as I said, you can decide for yourself after we finish telling them whether you think they're true. We love a good myth, we love a legend in Ireland, as you know. So one of the stories that I was told many, many years ago, I think not one of the first times, I've lost count of how many times I've been to the Giants Causeway, but one of the times I was there when I worked for Bushmills, I was told this story and it just stuck with me. And I said it to Barry that I wanted to tell it to everyone, and he was like, yeah, you have to, it's a great one. So this is a story of a wee woman, a little woman called Mary, who used to frequent the Giants Causeway. I'm sure most people here are familiar with the Giants Causeway, but if you are not, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site up on the County Antrim coast, the north coast, just about 2 minutes outside of the village of Bushmills, and it consists of over 40,000 basalt rocks. It's owned now by the National Trust. It has been for, I think, about maybe 12 years or so at this stage. So it's one of the most visited kind of tourist destinations on the island. I think they have approximately 1 million visitors every year. But this story dates back to about the 1970s, when a wee woman, Mary, would visit the Causeway every single day to greet any visitors that might make their way down the path to the stones. So she would sit on a very specific area. If you've been to the Giants Causeway, you might know what I'm talking about, but it's an area just slightly up from the photo you can see there, where the stones are a little bit more level. And she used to sit there every day and give out free whiskey. I'm assuming it was Bushmills, who knows? She gave out free whiskey to any visitor who wanted it, who would have passed by her, offered it to tourists, to locals. Anybody who wanted a dram, she would have given it to them. Now, after maybe, I think she got away with this for maybe a year or so, until the authorities caught on to what she was doing, and they came down and they had a word with her, and they said, listen, Mary, you can't be giving away free whiskey to people. It's not licensed down here. You're not allowed to do that. You can't do this. And she said, okay, no problem. I'll stop giving whiskey. I'll stop giving everybody whiskey. So then a few weeks later, the authorities come back, and people still have whiskey in their hands. They still have glasses or whatever it might be, a vessel of whiskey in their hands, and they think, Mary hasn't listened to a word we're saying. What's going on? But it turns out when they approached her, she said, but I'm not selling them whiskey. I'm not giving them whiskey anymore. I'm selling them water, and I'm giving them whiskey for free. So I'm not selling it. There's nothing illegal. So to get around that, she sold water as opposed to selling whiskey. And that's a kind of little story. It could be true. Who knows? There's plenty of people who said it was true. But I thought it really stuck with me, and it was just a really kind of a funny little lighthearted story about people being passionate about giving whiskey to visitors.
The water without life.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Oh dear.
I have a great video that I found here yesterday, and I wonder if I can find it again today. And it was on the Causeway, on Giants Causeway with you. Let me see if I have it here.
No, is this the one where I nearly slipped and fell on the death traps of the rocks that they are down there?
It could be. Let me see if I have it here. I might not have it here.
No, I don't want to see this. I know exactly which one this is.
Do you know the one you do? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think I have it to hand here, but when I do have it, I'll find it.
That'll appear on social media tomorrow following this story. Oh dear me.
Okay, well done. All right, that's our first whiskey story. Would she have been pouring Bushmills, do you think?
I would say so, yeah. I'd say it would have been a wee drop of Black Bush now.
Okay. Here is another great story. So I am endlessly fascinated and amazed by how much we have to thank in our day-to-day life to whiskey, how much we can credit to the world of whiskey, including these little devices that we have stuck to our hands like an extra limb. And if it wasn't for Irish whiskey, we wouldn't have a phone. We wouldn't be able to communicate. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Irish whiskey in more ways than one. We're gathered here, obviously, to talk about Irish whiskey, but we'd have no mechanism to connect with one another if it wasn't for Irish whiskey money. This man here is the godfather of the modern method of communications. This is Guglielmo Marconi, the Italian inventor who we credit with wireless communications and the first ever long distance wireless communications that took place from north of Ireland all the way over to Newfoundland, from Cornwall in the southwest of England to Newfoundland as well. But Guglielmo Marconi developed his Marconi company with money from the world of Irish whiskey. And it's an interesting story because Marconi himself was part of the Jameson whiskey family, because it was Guglielmo Marconi's mother, Annie, who was the great-granddaughter of John Jameson himself. Now, they lived in Italy. She married an Italian man. They lived in Italy. Guglielmo Marconi, from a young age, was an experimenter, a tinkerer. He liked to take things apart, figure out how things worked. And he, in any case, discovered the ability to transmit communications, transmit sounds from one side of a bedroom to another, eventually going from one side of the world to another. But his mad, harebrained idea and invention was written off by a lot of people. He shared his ideas, he shared his invention with his family, he shared them with his uncles, who, very to-do men in the halls of great power in different cities like London and Rome. And one of those men was another Jameson family member who had inherited a lot of the Jameson whiskey money. And he took some of that Jameson whiskey money and gave it to Guglielmo to start the Marconi company and to use it to fund his experiments and to fund his construction of his big radio towers to be able to do his communications. So if it wasn't for the money that was put in place by the Jameson family, which came from all the money made from making whiskey, we wouldn't have communications like we have today. Now, Jameson themselves recognized the great role that Marconi played and their own connection to it when they released, going back now probably 20 years, a Marconi edition of a Jameson Marconi release. And what was unique about this was one of the first times that Irish distillers had ever experimented with virgin oak casks. And this was before Jameson Gold. And so this was released as a kind of a forerunner to Jameson Gold, and was probably there wasn't a huge market for it at the time, but it led to Jameson Gold, which became a huge seller. But that's the first of my little tales tonight, is the remarkable connection that we have between Jameson and our mobile phones. So connecting Steve Jobs to John Jameson in less than 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon there, I think.
So they're in Ballycastle, which is where the first radio signal was transmitted across to Rathlin Island, I believe. I remember assignment on Marconi when I was at uni. So that was from Ballycastle, which is literally 10 minutes away from where I am right now, out to Rathlin Island, which again is about you can get over in 45 minutes on a ferry. But there's, the little blue plaques that recognize kind of culturally significant areas. There's a cottage in Ballycastle where he lived, and there's a blue plaque on it as well. So yeah, really, really interesting, the ties of Jameson.
Yeah, isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
If you go through the families, the big name families, and you follow their lineage and you follow their descendants, you start to see the impact that they had. You take 3 families alone, which would be the 3 families that formed eventually Irish distillers, or United Distillers that became Irish distillers in the 1960s. The Jameson family, the Powers family, and the Murphy family, their descendants and their family members did so much in the cities and the country that they were part of to change the course of life for hundreds of thousands of people through charitable donations, through governance, through donations to build churches, through employment. It's absolutely incredible. All of the things we could discover were because of whiskey money, which is there's just no end to it. No end to it.
Interlinked in so many ways into day-to-day life that you don't even realize.
Tom is sending us a SOS there, 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots. So Tom's in trouble. We might need to help him.
Where are you, Tom? We'll send you out some whiskey. Save you.
My dad learned, so my dad spent almost 50 years at sea, and his early form of communication at sea with other ships was Morse code, and so I'd ask him sometimes like to share some Morse code, but he would speak it because that was how because it almost had a noise, like it was like and so he could actually talk out sentences in Morse code. So it's still used, but just not as much as it used to be.
Amazing.
All right, that's my first my little tale and take. So that goes with the drop of Jameson. What have you got for us next?
So the next one is the Dublin Fire of 1875. So again, some of you may be familiar with this. I do think it is spoken about a little bit if you do the Jameson tour, the Bow Street tour in Dublin. And if anyone is familiar with the Dublin Fire Brigade Whiskey Club, their name is part of the name of their club is obviously taken from the Great Dublin Fire of 1875. So that's where they.
I never even connected that. I never connected that.
Yeah.
What's the name of the club?
DFB 1875. Yeah. There you are. Every day is a school day. If you go into the Palace Bar in Dublin, obviously a few of us were there a number of weeks ago. Upstairs, just on the first floor, if you look right at the back, up on the wall, you'll see their crest, 1875, and that's there. If you Google it, you could probably find a photo of it as well. But it's obviously the home of their club. They host all of their tastings in the Palace Bar, and yeah, that's where they get their name from. There you are. Now,
how about it?
There you go. So the Dublin Fire, or the Great Dublin Fire, you'll kind of hear it referred to both, or Dublin's Whiskey Fire, any of the above. It happened on the 18th of June, 1875, and it is believed to have started out in a bonded warehouse on RD Street, which is in the Liberties area of Dublin. So the exact cause is unknown, but it was a massive fire. There was about between 5,000 and 6,000 hogsheads, so 5,000 to 6,000 casks of whiskey were being stored in this bonded warehouse alone, which is a significant number. So today's value, it would be about 6 million. It'd be about €6 million of whiskey that was lost in today's money. I think in total, there was about 1.2 million litres of whiskey that were flowing through the streets of Dublin as a result of this fire. So the barrels in the warehouse, with the heat, they would have exploded, and subsequently gallons and gallons of whiskey would have been released, flowing down the streets of Dublin. I think it flowed about 300 to 400 meters away from the warehouse itself, and left a complete trail of destruction, with whiskey literally burning on flames throughout the streets of Dublin. So the river of whiskey itself was 2 foot wide and 6 inches deep. But the one thing that really stood out to me from this story is it's kind of very just typically Irish nature. They thought to themselves, hold on a second, this is an awful lot of whiskey that's going to waste here flowing through the streets of Dublin. So any vessel that they physically could have got their hands on, people were coming out of their houses into the streets and just essentially scooping up whiskey with pots, They used their caps. Men were taking caps off their head and scooping up whiskey and drinking whiskey out of their cap. People took off their shoes. They were using boots to kind of salvage any drop of whiskey that they possibly could, with no regard for the fact that it was probably extremely hot, because it had been on fire out of this warehouse. So yeah, that was one massive significance that happened in Dublin, the Liberties area. So very typically Irish reaction to whiskey flowing through the streets. Fill your boots, quite literally.
It's a story that gets told proudly in the Liberties area on any tour, how they talk about the ingenuity used to extinguish or stop the fire from burning the city to the ground. So it was a fire that threatened the destruction of, really at the time, what was the second city in the British Empire. You had London and you had Dublin. And the worry was that this fire was so all-encompassing in a city that didn't have fire extinguishers or sprinklers, that this was going to burn the city to the ground. And one of the quick-thinking firemen took advantage of one of the natural resources that was available to them at the time to stop the fire. One of the natural resources available to them came via the modes of transportation that were most common at the time, which were horses. And with horses comes a byproduct. And that byproduct has an awful smell to it. And you'll find it underneath the horses as they walk along the streets of Killarney or Dublin or wherever else. Anyway, there were certain workers in Dublin at the time whose job was to follow horses around and to pick up all of their dump, whatever their effluent that comes out of the horse, and to cart it away from the city. Well, one of the firemen had this great idea that the only thing that could possibly stop this fire was to literally build walls of shite around the flames. They did. So they sent for all of these mountains of poo and they brought it in by the truckload and they built walls of shite. And thanks to that, they stopped the flames and they stopped the fire from spreading, which is another remarkable outcome from a storytelling perspective of this story.
Stop encompassing the whole city. That very eloquent way with words there. There's no other way you could have possibly worded that, to be fair. Oh my word.
How many people, do you know how many people were killed? How many people died?
So there were 24 injured, but 13 killed. And none of it was as a result of the actual fire. It was all down to alcohol poisoning, believe it or not, which is unbelievable. We spend all this time trying to dispel the myth of the Irish overconsumption of alcohol, And we're like, well, how many people died? 13. All right, was that from the fire, was it? No, wasn't the fire at all. No. Drink. Johnny,
that's a great story, though. It's a great story.
How much whiskey could a welly hold if a welly could hold whiskey? That's a great one. I've never tried it, actually. Barry, you posted something ages ago about drinking whiskey out of any vessel, basically, and one of them was a shoe.
I'm a big proponent of any non-leaking vessel being the correct vessel for whiskey, but you kind of have to draw the line at flaming, burning, molten whiskey would not suit a rubber welly. But can you imagine, if this whiskey was burning and they're drinking it and they're putting it into hats and anything at all and scooping it up and drinking it and they're trying to get it before the alcohol evaporates? Can you imagine the conditions that they must have lived in where that was considered? That's a good idea.
I know. Because the whiskey, obviously in the cask, and they referred to this as well, was undiluted. So it was a very, very high strength anyway. And then the fact that it was literally on fire, like molten lava flowing through the streets of Dublin, and they were just drinking it. Free will. Thought free whiskey, great. I'll take that. Don't care what form it's in. Don't care what temperature it is.
One of the outcomes of that fire and a more modern approach to risk management around whiskey is that to this day, there are, I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's only 70 barrels of whiskey are stored within the city limits of Dublin. And they're stored in one of the most fire protected rooms in the country, and that's inside the Bow Street Distillery, where they are maturing some whiskey inside there. Now, I think there's 3 barrels in Teeling Distillery that are named after the kids, right? But I don't know if they're counting that as maturation. All of Teeling's whiskey is matured elsewhere in County Louth and other places. But the only whiskey matured in the entire city of Dublin now is in the Bow Street Distillery in just one room. And that's because Dublin is such a built-up city, as all cities are. You can't be storing combustible, explosive liquids like that next to firework factories and yeah.
And I think another reason as well that kind of came from the multiple fires that broke out over in distilleries kind of across the 1800s and early 1900s was that the same age of whiskey is not all kept in one warehouse. So they will never keep, like, say, a batch of 20-year-old whiskey in the one warehouse. They'll kind of spread it out so that if there were to be a fire, they wouldn't lose a huge volume of one, a destined whiskey, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
As a kind of preventative measure to not lose loads of stock of a certain SKU.
Mike says Barry has a great podcast on that. Yeah, there is an old YouTube video on that. If you look back to our channel here, afterwards you'll find old stories going way back 5 years ago. I first did a couple of videos on the stories of Irish whiskey. The Great Fire was one of them. At the time, I'd never heard of it, and I thought that nobody else had heard of it either. And I thought I was telling this amazing story that everyone would be wowed by, and everyone's like, "Yeah, we've heard that story 100 times, Barry." But thanks for telling us. That's great.
Was there not something a few years ago as well? I don't want to say Jim Beam in case it wasn't, but I have a feeling it was, that there was something similar happened where there was a fire or something and loads of barrels of whiskey rolled into a river, or did I dream that?
That was when their rick house collapsed.
That was it.
Was it Jim Beam? I can't remember. Maybe it was.
It tells me it was Jim Beam, and loads of whiskey kind of contaminated the river or something. I think that was a good few years now, but that just kind of jogged my memory that happened. I'm sure the folks in the comments will be able to confirm that for us.
My next story is Heaven Hill. Okay. My next story is a story that is almost too fanciful to believe. If it didn't happen, you wouldn't believe it. I don't know that it could happen today. I remember discovering this story a long time ago, and asking somebody in the distillery about it, and they said, "I don't know if that's true." And I produced the information about the story, and they said, "Do you know what? Now I'm starting to remember little bits of this. You're right. This is the most incredible story about our distillery." And I'm talking about Kilbeg Distillery, and I'm talking about a scandal in the Kilbeg Distillery that brought down an Irish government. A scandal in the Kilbeg Distillery that brought down the Irish government, would you believe? And that we have to go all the way back to the 1950s for this story now. So we're going to talk about the Kilbeg Distillery. And you might have heard the name Locks in relation to Kilbeg Distillery. So Locks is the family that ran the distillery. You'll see the tall chimney, there you'll see it. For the Kilbeg Distillery, on one side it says Locks, and the other side says whiskey on the tall chimney. But this Kilbeg Distillery constantly debates Bushmills as to who is the oldest distillery in the world. Kilbeg claims it is the oldest continuously licensed distillery in Ireland because they have a license for distilling. Anyway, it's all of it is rubbish. Neither of them have any claim to any date except the day they're producing whiskey from right now. But in any case, Locks Kilbeg Distillery has a remarkable history. And we're concerned about this period in the 1950s. So you'll know from the stories we've told over the years that, and from other sources you've heard this from, but not our stories, the Irish whiskey industry had a wonderful peak in the mid-1800s, late 1800s. And then there was a period of steep decline down to the 1950s and 1960s when Irish whiskey was on its knees. The Second World War in Ireland really put a big nail in the coffin of Irish whiskey when exports were pretty much banned. Exports of goods were banned, and the idea was you wanted to keep the government's idea was you wanted to keep your products at home in the domestic market, but the people in the domestic market have no money to be buying expensive whiskies. In any case, the decline of whiskey continued to the point where distilleries were shutting, and Loch's Kilbeg Distillery was really on its knees in the 1950s. And in a last-ditch attempt to save the distillery, there was a mad plan hatched, an absolutely mad plan hatched. So after the war, when times are really tough, it was decided by the descendants of the original Loch's family they were going to put the distillery on the market. And they found a syndicate of people who were willing to pay 305,000 British pounds at the time, or Irish pounds at the time, for the distillery. And that was accepted by the Loch's family. Now, the syndicate was made up of a Swiss businessman, a Clonmel Tipperary solicitor, and an English crook called Maximo. You always need an English crook in these things. And they'd all been previously involved in another harebrained scheme previously to this. And that scheme was to introduce greyhound racing to Switzerland. It's an odd kind of an approach now, but in any case, that was what they had done. Now, their goal was that they were going to buy up all of the distillery stocks of whiskey for the £305,000. They really weren't interested in the distillery itself. They just saw that there was a lot of whiskey there, 60,000 gallons. And what they were going to do was buy all this whiskey up, and then they're going to sell it in the black market in England for £11 a gallon. So they kind of doubled their money if they could do it that way. And that was their plan, right? Now, auctioneers were hired in Ireland to secure the deal. And one of the auctioneers, his name was Quirk, and he was a Fianna Fáil senator. Now, Fianna Fáil is an Irish political party, and senators no different than US senators. So he was a senator, and he was also an auctioneer. And he was brought in to secure the deal. Now, the family hoped that by bringing him in as an auctioneer, that he might be able to make sure that the government had no issues with the takeover, and that he'd be able to maybe smooth over any objections there might be for the distillery to be acquired by kind of a semi-international syndicate, right? So he was brought in, right? And then they were hoping that he might also, in order, as well as kind of smoothing over the deal, that he might be able to say to the government, look, could we increase maybe our quota of exports, right? So that we can make a little bit more money. Exports were kind of, again, being reduced for fear of taking money outside the country, you know? So the idea they had then was that what they would do is they would get a gold watch, and they would give this to the Irish Prime Minister at the time, Eamon de Valera. And this should be a kind of a goodwill gesture. Hey, look, we're talking about this wonderful idea to save this distillery. Oh, and by the way, here's a lovely gift of this gold watch, right? But the management at Loch's Distillery, who weren't the family themselves, but the management heard about this deal to give the Irish Prime Minister this gold watch. And they weren't very happy about this at all, because they saw this as being a bit kind of, this seems like a little bit of kind of snake oil sales techniques going on here, a bit of kind of a greasing the palm of government. And they were worried that if the distillery was sold, that the management might lose their jobs. And it was a bit of a golden goose for them, because they were being paid, even though the distillery wasn't making a whole lot of whiskey. So what they did was the management kind of told on this deal. They kind of went to another few members of the Irish government, and they said, listen, guess what's happening over there? They're trying to get this deal through, and they're giving golden watches to the Prime Minister there, to the Taoiseach, Eamon de Valera. I don't think this is a good thing at all, you know. So one of these other government ministers, his name is Oliver J. Flanagan, he then raised this in the House of Parliament. He raised this issue, and he said, this is atrocious behaviour, that you are greasing the palm of a sitting Prime Minister with a gold watch in order to sell this distillery. So soon, half the country, half of Ireland was talking about this gold watch and this shady deal involving bribery and corruption and a drop of whiskey at the same time. But also the big fear of all the time was foreigners, Swiss and English, coming in to take control of this distillery. So an election had already been called for late in the 1940s, 1948, 1949, right? So this whole saga became known as the Locks scandal, and it took on a very public profile, and it became the biggest thing in the election of 1948, the Locks scandal. De Valera called a tribunal to save the government's reputation, but even though it officially cleared the members of the government of any personal involvement in illegal activities, the public remained unconvinced, and the scandal galvanized anti-government support, and they lost the election, and it led to the first ever inter-party government. In other words, a couple of different parties coming together to form a government, and not just have one party running the government. And the scandal ruined the goodwill of the Kilbeg Distillery, of the Locks Company, so much so that the owners were trying everything to turn the business around. Yet they couldn't do it. They were short of working capital. They couldn't raise any more money. Nobody wanted anything to do with the distillery. And in 1952, the straw that broke the camel's back was that the government raised taxes on spirits dramatically, so much so that in 1953, Locks closed their distillery, and it remained closed for 50, almost 60 years, until John Teeling came along and opened it up again. But it was a harebrained idea to try and maybe capitalize on an ailing whiskey business, and it was unsuccessful. It brought down an Irish government. It closed the distillery, and to this day, really no significant distilling of any sort has happened in the distillery, apart from they have a little bit of once a year a still is run in there kind of ceremoniously, and a little bit of distillation takes place. But that was the end of the road for 200 years of distilling history in Kilbeggan, all because of a gold watch. So keep away from the gold watches, Lauren.
Moral of the story, don't buy a gold watch. And certainly don't gift it to anyone. That's mad. I had heard that story before, but hearing it again just kind of sort of solidifies how mental it was, as you say. Like, there's nothing really comes out of Kilbeggan, you know?
Kilbeggan happens to be, surprisingly, the 10th best-selling Irish whiskey in the world today, but most of its sales happen in the likes of Germany and Eastern Europe, and we don't see it. You don't see Kilbeggan sales in any quantity in Ireland. You don't see it in the United States in any real quantity. I mean, today it's a heritage site more than anything else, and a little bit of distilling. So anytime you see a bottle of whiskey with the words Kilbeggan on it, it's not made in Kilbeggan. It's made in County Louth in the Cooley Distillery. But it just shows wherever there's whiskey, wherever there's a chance to make a bit of money, you'll attract a nefarious crowd, typically the British.
Had to get that in there, had to finish on that. But no, you don't really see even a bottle of Kilbeggan, certainly not up north anyway. On the back bar, on the shelves, you say just not really a brand that makes a lot of noise in Ireland. Kind of like Tullamore Dew, in fairness. They don't market to Ireland whatsoever.
Lloyd saw a bottle of Kilbeggan for $28. It depends which Kilbeggan it is. There's a number of different releases. The Kilbeggan blend, their entry-level product, 40% ABV, light whiskey. It's not gonna set your heart on fire, I don't think. But if you're looking to take the cold edge off on a frosty day, it'll probably do the job for you.
Absolutely. So before I get started on my third tale, my tall tale of the evening, I'm not a pyromaniac. It just so happened to be that my two stories involved a fire. Just to clarify. So this next one is perhaps a story that is often maybe referred to, but not really kind of really delved into as much as others. And I think a lot of people don't realise when you walk through Belfast, and in particular on Hill Street and in the Cathedral Quarter, that there is such a long-standing tie to Bushmills. So similar happened to Bushmills that did with the fire breakout in the warehouse in Dublin. So on the 25th of November, 1885, there was a fire broke out in the old Bushmills distillery. It was said to have started out in the boiler house, and the entire distillery, the whole site, bar a good sort of fairly sort of healthy supply of whiskey, was destroyed. So all buildings, all production areas, everything, offices, everything, you name it, was completely destroyed in this fire. So anything that had been archived, any archived material on the brand, was lost up until that point. Anything that had been documented in newspapers, anything at all, old kind of distilling records, the cask inventory, everything was completely destroyed at that point in time. So in fairness, it was rebuilt pretty quickly. I think they rebuilt it at that time in about 5 years, that the distillery was up and running again. But in 1885, they obviously had lost more or less everything. So there was no real headquarters at that point in time. So the owners at the time, Jane McColgan and Patrick Corrigan, they were kind of a Belfast spirits merchant, a grocer at that point. They were the owners at this point in time. So they had to think very, very quickly as to where they could base themselves. So they purchased in 1886 a plot of land in Belfast on Hill Street, which you can see in the picture there, that now is home to the Heart Bar, one of Belfast's highest volume bars in terms of both whiskey and pints, and Waterman House, which is on the next slide here. So that plot of land they purchased is now home to the Heart Bar and to Waterman House, which is a very, it's a fine dining restaurant owned by Niall McKenna. He's one of the top chefs in Ireland, really, but in particular in NI, and certainly in Belfast as well. He's very, very well known and very respected. So from 1886 until the Belfast Blitz in 1941 in Belfast, when all of these buildings were destroyed, this was home to the headquarters. This was the headquarters of Bushmills. So the Heart Bar itself, it was offices. It serviced the offices, the headquarters, and then Waterman House, which you can see here now, as I said, the fine dining restaurant, was a warehouse and a bottling plant. Now, to look at it just from the outside, you wouldn't think it's very big, but when you go inside, there's about 3 stories, and there's a huge area, where the dining area now, in one sort of particular place, they have a cookery skill in there as well, so it's really, really big. You wouldn't think, as I said, it was big enough for a warehouse, but if you go inside, you would understand. So that was a home of Bushmills up until 1941. So really, really strong ties to Hill Street. And you can see even on the side of the Heart Bar, you'll see the old Bushmills whiskey sign, and that's kind of a little nod to the past. So the Cathedral Quarter, it's so interlinked with whiskey history, but you wouldn't immediately know that just to walk through it. It's kind of, you have to look harder.
Do you think the folks in Kilbeg, knowing that story, are like, I told you we're the oldest? You burned to the ground.
Funnily enough, the one thing that was not lost, because it was in the public records, was the 1608 license to the area. The original document of that is still in the tasting room in Bushmills. So listen, I'm not here to argue anymore. I'm just stating facts.
There are lots of first of all, that's fascinating. I've eaten in Waterman House, and I didn't know that it was home to the whiskey warehouse for Bushmills. That's fascinating. And I suspect if you're taking our Belfast Whiskey Weekend walking tour, some of this may be repeated or pointed out to you in person. But that is amazing history. What was I going to say? The stories of the likes of the formation of Bushmills or distilling first happening back in 1608 are. It's interesting how, with each successive generation, with these distilleries that have been around for successive generations, the likes of Middleton, the likes of Bushmills, Kilbeg, etc., when it comes to marketing, the marketing agencies that are brought on, and they'll change every few years, they'll always look to find those stories. They'll always look to find those points of connection or those points of interest and those moments of interest that they can point to and say, look, there's a dotted line to that. There's a through line to this. And 1608, obviously it's one to hold on to, isn't it? It's no distillery can prove that there's a charter for distilling, even though the charter doesn't say the word Bushmills on it. Just,
that's where the imagination creeps in. But
I love how for the longest time, and only up until I think about 30 years ago, all of Bushmills advertising used the other date. What was it? 1759? 1784. So they used 1784, and Kilbeggan is 1759. And so that's why Kilbeggan always claimed to be older. And then Bushmills is like, we got to find something older. We got to find, anybody got an older like coin or something? And somebody's like, I got this charter, like this charter over here. Nobody's claimed this charter. It's over there in the library. We should take that, right? And they're like, all right, let's do that. And that's amazing. So now, hopefully, no distillery finds like an old like piece of vellum from 1607 anywhere, or Bushmills is all out of luck.
Well, there you are.
Not your problem.
What's what? Not my problem.
Not your problem.
What's McConnell's? McConnell's 1776.
Yeah,
1776.
1776. That's right. Yeah.
There you are. Yeah.
That's the oldest Irish whiskey brand.
Yeah.
Ever. The first ever Irish whiskey brand, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Even they as well, like the Cathedral Quarter, honestly, as I said there, like you don't realize how much whiskey history is tied to the Cathedral Quarter itself. Like even on Dunbar Street, which is literally just down beside the Hart Bar, it's the street literally immediately kind of to the left of it as you look at it. They had a warehouse there. They had bonded warehouses there on Dunbar Street. And the Dirty Onion, which again is another one of Belfast's highest sort of volume bars in terms of whiskey and pints. That was a Jameson warehouse called Stack N in the 1900s. So there's so much whiskey history went on in that area as well. So it's great to see that it's more of a talking point now for Belfast with 2 brand new distilleries in the city, which is great.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great story. And I bet there's so much more to that. Like I think there's probably so much information around and interesting things that happened around that time during the rebuilding of the distillery. And that's when they brought in Charles Doig, the architect, to rebuild the distillery.
Yeah.
The pagoda, those pagoda chimneys, the only distillery in Ireland that had them up until I think the Shed Distillery in County Leitrim has them now.
Yeah.
But there's so much that like you go down rabbit holes there and be lost for days.
Same with the steamship as well. Like it was Jane McColgan and Patrick Corrigan that not constructed themselves, but they instigated the steamship, the SS Bushmills, in the 1890 on its biggest voyage around the world to export the whiskey. So it was 5 years after the fire.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
that's another story that to be told. Yeah, we're going to move on to a story that has all the elements of a good story for our community: a castle, whiskey, Ireland, and America, all rolled into one. You couldn't write this stuff. A Hollywood director would look at this story and say, no one will believe it. I'm not making that movie. Forget about it. But it happened. Like all the best stories, you couldn't write it. This is, of course, Napo Castle in the west of Ireland, just outside Shannon Airport. It reminds me of the story of the American tourist asking why they had built Bunratty Castle so close to the motorway with all the noise of the cars. But this is not far from Shannon Airport. And despite the noise of the planes going over, they weren't worried about that when they built it in the 1500s, I'd say. Napo Castle, you may know it as a bunch of single malts or a famous single pot still whiskey from 1951. It was the home of a family, the Edwin Andrews family, and Mark Edwin Andrews and his wife Lavone, 2 Americans who holidayed in Ireland in the 1950s and early 1960s, fell in love with the idea of living in Ireland, of finding an old castle. Imagine in the 1960s in Ireland, you could have picked up a castle for whatever coins and old stones and maybe a piece of a cabbage you had in your pocket. You probably could have handed it over and somebody would have given you a castle in return. But they bought this ruin of a castle in 1966. And Levone is a famous architect, the first female architect inducted into a very famous architect's body in the United States. And Mark Edwin Andrews, famous industrialist. He'd also served as secretary in the Navy, undersecretary in the Navy, responsible for purchasing and acquisitions. They were from Texas, and they came to Ireland in 1966. They bought this castle, and they set about restoring it. Levone did most of the interior work, restoring this castle to a real grandeur, which she did in a remarkable way. While she was doing that, Mark Edwin Andrews probably had a bit of a loose end, because she was probably saying, listen, Mark, will you leave me alone? I'm trying to work here and fix this castle. Would you go away and get an old hobby or something? And he said, grand, I'll go off and I'll find some whiskey. And she said, great, go off and find some whiskey. So he loved Scotch. He was a fan of single malt whiskey. And he went around Ireland looking for single malt. And at the time in 1966, you had on the east coast of Ireland, you had the distilleries combining, Jameson, Powers, and of course Cork on the south coast, combining to form Irish distillers. On the west coast, here they were buying this castle, but there was really no single malt whiskey being made in the Republic of Ireland at the time. Bushmills was making it, of course, up in the north, and but he went around Ireland. He was going to the Midlands, going to Dublin, going to Cork, looking for single malt. And we don't have any single malt, and most distilleries are closed. In fact, the only thing that we have, they said, is small stocks of like single pot still. And he's like, well, what's single pot still whiskey? And they told him what it was, and he wasn't convinced anyway. But he eventually got to the old B. Daly distillery in Tullamore, and it had closed its gates in 1954. So 12 years later, he finds his way to Tullamore, gets talking to somebody, and they mention how there's still some stocks of whiskey left in an old warehouse in Tullamore. He might be interested in some of those whiskies. So he went and he tasted the whiskies that were there, and he thought, oh my God, these are incredible. And it was a stock of 1951 whiskey that was single pot still whiskey, so a blend, a mixture of malted and unmalted barley. And there was probably a few other adjunct grains in there that we don't know about. And he brought this stock of whiskey, pallets of it, some say upwards of 100 barrels, back to Napo Castle, where the story goes that it was matured further. And so when he bought it, it was whatever, a 15-year-old whiskey. He kept maturing this whiskey right up until 1987, when it was finally bottled as Napo Castle 1951, a 36-year-old single pot still whiskey. Now, that initial batch of casks had dwindled over the 20 years because he loved his whiskey. And so he'd be dipping into the old barrels. Instead of a fried egg in the morning, he might have an old drop of whiskey. And the story goes that instead of sending his friends and family photographs of his kids at Christmas time, he'd send them photographs of the barrels of whiskey. That's how much he loved that's how much he loved the whiskey. So in 1987, he bottled it up and he released it. There's that book, 1951, and beautiful. He commissioned an artist to design a lovely hand engraving, hand drawing of the castle on the front, and bottled in 1987, 36 years of age, matured entirely in sherry casks, so only sherry casks. It's a remarkable snapshot in time. And in any case, fast forward to today, and Napo Castle went from being this man's hobby to this man's passion. Eventually his son took over. His son thought, well, you know what, if my dad liked whiskey this much and my dad really wanted Irish whiskey to take off because he fell in love with it himself, I'm going to try and bring it to America. So his son, Mark Edwin Andrews III, brought Napo, what some stocks were left over to the United States, and he started a company to do that, an importing company called Castle Brands. Castle Brands went on to become a massive drinks company, owner of Jefferson Bourbon, Napo Castle, Clontarf Castle Whiskey. In any case, in 2019, was it? Pernod Ricard, parent company of Irish distillers, acquired Castle Brands. Napo Castle Whiskey, up until that point, had been distilled as single malt in Northern Ireland, in Bushmills, in County Antrim. And the new make spirit had been sent down to Middleton to be matured and vatted and managed by the Middleton team. Then it became part of Irish Distillers. And so Knapp Oak Castle today is the only single malt brand in the Irish Distillers stable. It is still produced and will continue to be produced in Bushmills, but it'll be matured entirely in Middleton, where it has been managed by the blenders and the warehousing team for the last 20, 25 years. There's been a few Knapp Oaks through the years came via Cooley Distillery, but Bushmills is where it was made historically, and still is to this day. So that is a remarkable story of one man's vision. He went on to donate the castle to the Irish government. Today it's part of Clare County Council, who manage it together with the Cliffs of Moher and Bunratty Castle and a couple of other heritage sites in the west of Ireland. And we're going to visit it on our next Whiskey Bus. We're going to have our welcome reception and tasting in the castle on Whiskey Bus number 3. You're going to go inside the castle, which is off limits to the general public normally. You have to have a special event to go there. And we're going to drink this stuff. 1951 Knapp Oak Castle. You're going to go inside. And one of the highlights of my whiskey journey has been tasting this inside Knapp Oak Castle. I did that last year when I was doing a little bit of work for Irish Distillers. We shot some videos in there. And the hairs on the back of my neck stood up when I cracked the screw cap on this. They broke for the first time since 1987 when they had been sealed. And in doing so had reinvigorated and re-enlivened this story of this whiskey. And to sip that there and to think, going all the way back to 1966 when Mark Edmund Andrews had this idea that we could sip the whiskey in his castle, his whiskey in his castle, and you're going to get to do the same when you join us in Whiskey Bus 3. That's going to be a big moment. That's going to be a great time.
I mean, what a way to kick off a Whiskey Bus week. Like kings and queens in a castle, sipping on Knapp Oak 1951 with Dave McCabe, Middleton Blender. I mean, yeah, why wouldn't you? Matt, you know you want to. Come on.
Come on over, folks. Come on over. I feel like some of you could have a 7-day ailment or sickness that we're happy to provide doctor's notes and certificates to anyone who wants them.
And we can keep you out of any social media photographs, etc., and pretend you were never there. No one needs to know.
Dr. Anthony Sheehy signs all doctor's notes.
HR Anthony Sheehy will sign everything as and where applicable.
I'm going to interrupt the storytelling for one moment because I know some of you are interested in this. And those of you who aren't, well, you'll indulge me because I want to tell you a little bit about, I want to tease a little bit about our next Stories and Sips Whiskey Club release. I'm going to put it up on the screen. So our next, we have had a fantastic journey with our whiskies over the last almost 2 years, 1 year and 10 months. We've been going as a club. We've had 7 whiskies. We're about to have 2 more. So at the end of October, beginning of November, we will celebrate our 2nd birthday as a whiskey club. I'm very excited about that. And to celebrate our 2nd birthday and 2 years in existence, we are going to release 2 whiskies at the same time to celebrate our 2nd year in business as a whiskey club. One of the aspects of running a whiskey club that has been the most rewarding for me is getting to see the impact that our club members have on independent small whiskey companies in Ireland, getting the word out about them, purchasing their whiskies, building relationships with them. There are many of our club members who've gone on to build friendships with whiskey brand owners and those who work in those companies in Ireland. I see people go to Ireland and hang out with the whiskey brand owners. They've built lovely friendships and relationships over the years, and it's very rewarding to see that we can have some impact on small whiskey brands. So we're teaming up with a small whiskey brand in Ireland to release 2 whiskies, an independently owned whiskey brand, for our next Whiskey Club release. And it's 2 Whiskey Club releases. We are releasing a pair of pot still whiskies. 2 single pot still whiskies are going to be released. I'm not going to give you all the details. All I'm going to say is that 2 separate cask strength bottlings, 2 single pot stills will be released from W.D. O'Connell. We'll just put this up even bigger on the screen here for you. Here it is. We have 2 5-year-old single pot still whiskies, and they are unique in 2 ways. One is that on the week that we started our whiskey club, at the end of October, beginning of November in 2021, these whiskies were recast into two very unique cask types where they have stayed for the last almost 2 years. And I'm not going to give away what those cask types are. All I will say for now is that we've never released a whiskey that has been finished in these two cask types. So we'll release that information maybe next week or maybe this coming week. You're going to have a chance to buy the two of them together or individually. We're putting together a birthday kit, a birthday pack. So if you wanted to get the two whiskies, we're also going to, W.D. O'Connell is going to create a tasting kit of 3 other whiskies. We're going to have glassware. We're going to have coasters. We're going to have stickers. We're going to have a whole birthday gift box for those who want to buy the two whiskies together and make those available to you. So it's we're really excited about this release. I've tasted these two whiskies and I'm thrilled to see the direction they've gone and the flavors that have come out in such a short space of time. We're in this unique period with Irish whiskey for the first time in a generation where you don't need a whiskey to be 20 years of age to have flavor. You don't need it to be 12 years of age. You just need it to be managed correctly from distillation, from fermentation, all the way through to bottling and maturation along the way, of course. And that has been done masterfully by Daithí O'Connell over the past 2 years as he recasts these two whiskies. So 2 single pots of whiskies, 57% ABV and 59% ABV respectively, 700 milliliter bottles, so full-size bottles. And we'll have a little birthday kit to go with them. So anyway, that's what I am excited about. So if you are on the fence, as Matt is, about the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club, Matt, I don't know what I can do to convince you, but for $20 a month, that's your entire commitment. You don't have to buy anything if you don't want to, but we do come out with great whiskies. We have 8 whiskies planned for 2024. These are the last. Well, these are not even our last release of 2023. We hope to have another one before the end of the year as well. So that's what's coming. 2 great five-year-old pot still whiskies. We are going to keep the cost down as low as possible, but I'm going to share with you when we do release these where your money's going, in the sense of you with the release of these 2 whiskies, you're going to be supporting a privately held distillery, which is where these whiskies were distilled at Great Northern Distillery. You're going to be supporting an independent whiskey bonder and bottler, Daithí O'Connell. You're going to be supporting an independent fulfillment company in Lighthouse Drinks, the parent company of Irish Malts, independently owned, and you're supporting an independently owned and operated whiskey club. So all of the cost of this stays within 4 independent companies, and that gets me excited. So anyway, that is what's coming. We will hopefully, we're waiting on the labels to be produced. They're in the queue. I'll have more word on that this week. But before the end of October, these will be available. So in the next, we're hoping 3 to 4 weeks, 3 weeks, hopefully, we'll be ready to launch these and ship them to you. So I'm very excited about this. If anybody's got any questions about the Whiskey Club, feel free to reach out to me or ask any of our club members, ask in the comments, ask in our Facebook community whether it's worth it or whether it's not. Before the end of this year is out, you'll have these 2 releases, you'll have another release, and you'll have definitely one more, at least one more club tasting that's coming, that blind tasting, which I keep talking about, and you wonder probably where it's gone. It's coming. And then next year, you're going to have 8 whiskey releases, and you're going to have at least 4 quarterly sample kits sent to you, but most likely there'll be 6 or 8 sample kits. That's how many brands are lined up right now that are knocking on the door saying, we want to get out there. And I've no harm in teasing it. JJ Corrie, Connacht Distillery in Ballina in County Mayo, Method and Madness, just some of the brands that we're going to be working with tasting kits in the coming, sample kits in the coming few months. So be excited. I'm excited, or don't be excited. But in any case, I can't wait for these to get into your hands. Sinead, right. Back to the stories.
The labels look great. And I think as well, the one of the kind of standout points for a lot of people throughout the most recent whiskey bus was being able to support Daithí and someone who is independent and a slightly smaller brand as well. So, I mean, it really helps him, obviously, too, with releases like that as well, to get his name out there and his liquid and what he's done with it as a bonder, you know. It's great. Labels look brilliant.
So we'll be supporting lots of independent companies in 2024. We'll be getting you access to whiskies that aren't available to the general public. There will be samples that the general public can't get access to. And every single whiskey you get as part of the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club, or you decide to purchase, is a whiskey that cannot be purchased anywhere else. Unlike other clubs where certain whiskies may end up available to the general public or broader release, not with us, because all we do are single casks. Single cask releases, mostly at cask strength, but we ask the bonder or the blender to come up with the blends the strength they believe is best for us. All single casks. So as simple as that. They won't be available anywhere else on Earth. You're the only people on Earth who can taste these whiskies. That's it. We don't share them anywhere else. You're either a member to get the whiskies or you're not. I've had a couple of bars reach out to me recently asking if they could stock our whiskies. And I said, if you become a member of our club and you buy your whiskey like anybody else, any other club member, you can stock it on the shelf. But other than that, our members get first shot at everything else. All right. Story time.
Story time. I'm up next again. Yeah, I am.
Are you pouring a different whiskey there? Are you swapping it up?
No, I'm going back to Clone. So I've had a pour of Clone rum and raisin. I've had a pour of Rider's Tears in a Skill and Ice wine, and I'm back to Clone.
Very good. I'm moving on to Cliffs of Moher. This is a single malt Pedro Jimenez cask finish. We released last year, only 70 bottles. Well, this is the one that's closest to being finished of my Cliff's bottlings.
That looks a couple of pours left in that one. If you're heavy-handed, maybe
There's a few pours left in this one. There are lots of JJ Corrie is going to have some Ohio exclusive releases in March, and all I can say is that right now you might get to taste some of those in a little tasting kit. You might, if you're a club member, you might get to taste some of those.
Nice.
All right.
Teasing.
Sláinte,
absolutely. And congratulations on 2 years. That's mad. 2 years.
It's just great club members. I mean, like the members make the club, and great support, and the industry has responded and sees the great enthusiasm that exists in our club, and they are wanting to work with us. So we're creating what I hope we can maintain, which is just win-win-win scenarios where our members win, the brands win, and especially these independent brands that we can support and give a bump to and give a lift to. And then the club wins, because the more we do this and the more membership grows, I think the more we can release interesting things. I am all just one quick note on that is we are reinvesting whatever funds come in from the club as much as possible to buy casks. And I'm not talking about all these casks all the time, because we're buying casks of whiskey that come available where we think, you know what, it tastes good now. We think we can manage this right. And in time, we'll have our own releases within the club. So we'll have our own brand within the club of, let's say, something we've bought as a sourced whiskey. Let's say it comes from a distillery that really, they're not looking to be advertised or promoted. And we might have our own brand within the club of whiskies we've put together in quarter casks or sherry butts or hogsheads, and we figured out. So working with Eric Flynn, our blender, to come up with those, that kind of cask profile and kind of our release profile that we'll have over the coming years. So stay tuned anyway. Lots coming.
It's brilliant. So hard to believe it's been 2 years. I can't actually believe no one's asked you any questions about your sweatshirt either.
Yeah. Listen, everyone's got their nose in their whiskey glass.
Like, merch, I want merch. Anyway, my last story that I picked of the night. Now, when we said earlier, you can decide for yourselves whether or not some of these are true. This one is probably erring more on the side of we don't really know, but it makes for a good story anyway. Again, I heard this years ago. I can't even remember who told me where I heard this story, but I'll tell it anyway. And it's how Irish wakes came to be. So an Irish wake is essentially, it's a period of mourning for the passing of a friend, a family member, whoever it may be. But it's also a time to kind of celebrate them and remember their life and their memories and so on. So it's usually a mourning period which lasts about 2 to 3 days usually, and they were kind of very popular, for want of a better word, in the 1800s. But the origin of them is a point which is debated, but is also one which is quite interesting, and it makes for a great story. So it is believed that the reason why the Irish have wakes is essentially because in the 1700s and early 1800s, whiskey, let's just say, perhaps maybe wasn't as refined as it is today. So might not have been might not have been refined. The technology that we have today wasn't in place to ensure a really high quality spirit, really high quality whiskey. It just wasn't. It didn't exist at this point of time. Obviously, it improved dramatically over the many decades that followed. So people who drank whiskey were more kind of subject to alcohol poisoning and to being put in a comatose state. So people would drink so much whiskey, so much of this liquid that might not have been at a great quality, depending where it was sourced from or where it was produced, and they essentially passed out. They were comatose to the point that people thought they were dead. So this resulted in a lot of people, very unfortunately and quite grimly, being buried alive when people thought they were dead, but they actually were just passed out due to an overconsumption of alcohol. So, in order...
Is he dead? No, just a good session.
No, just a good session. He's poke him there on the sofa and see if he's still alive. So, this is kind of stemming off slightly from my main point, but apparently where the phrase dead ringer comes from is because they used to put little bells inside coffins, and if people did kind of revive after a good session and a good feed of whiskey, they rang the bell, and that's how people knew they were still alive. Anyway, that's slightly off course. So essentially, where the Irish wakes came from in that period of mourning of 2 to 3 days was essentially to ensure that the person was actually dead and hadn't just passed out momentarily from a feed of whiskey. So if that is true, fantastic story. If it's not, let's not let a lie get in the way of a good story.
I like it. I like it. I think it suits our narrative and our purpose in the world of whiskey. I think we should adopt it.
I think we should. Genuinely can't remember where I heard that, but it was one I was like, that's mad. Anyway.
You'll wake the dead. I like it. Well, in the vein of dubious stories, I mean, I've got one of my own, and I think that for my story, I'm going to ask you to cast aside any knowledge or common sense or education you might have, in fact, to endure and indulge me in this story, because this is a story that involves. I'd liken this story to any story where both dinosaurs and humans are in the same story, like living amongst one another. This next story would be similar, and it's a story that involves St. Patrick and whiskey, two entities divided by about 700 years. But in any case, separated. Poor St. Patrick would have had to wait about 700 years if he ever came across whiskey. But in any case, there's a great story that involves St. Patrick and whiskey, and it's all about how to get rid of the devil, because the devil, of course, was a thing of fear in pious Ireland, that would have had the devil hammered into them as being the thing to be afraid of if you sinned, you know. But the story goes that St. Patrick himself, he once visited an inn. Now, a couple of things here. St. Patrick was a missionary in the 5th century, so in the 400s, right? I don't know how many inns we had in Ireland in the 400s, but we're gonna go with it. So he visited this inn and he ordered a drop of whiskey. Now, if the owner was smart, he would have looked at him and said, "You're 700 years too early, but go on. What do you want?" Anyway, he said, "I'll have a drop of whiskey," and the owner said, "No problem. I'll give you this magic future spirit." And he gave him a very, very small little pour, right? Tiny, tiny little pour. And St. Patrick wasn't too happy about this now at all. And so he said, "Do you know what? I'm going to make sure that anyone else who ever comes into this inn is never going to be given a pour as small as that again. Now, it might have been such a small pour because the drink itself didn't exist, but that's besides the point. That'll only interrupt our story. So what he did was he told the innkeeper, he said, there's a devil in your cellar, right? So typically you get a small glass, you go, come here, there's a devil in your cellar, right? And so the innkeeper's like, what? A devil in the cellar? And he was terrified. And St. Patrick said, if you ever give a pour as small as that again, the devil's going to kill you. And the innkeeper was like, oh my God. So he didn't want that to happen. St. Patrick went away, out converting the pagans to Christianity. Thirsty old job, came back to the inn a few years later, delighted to see that the pub was roaring and people are knocking back big measures of the whiskey. And St. Patrick felt he'd done his job. He had not only converted everyone to Christianity, he'd converted everyone to a drink that didn't yet exist or hadn't even been dreamed of for 700 years. And the story goes that to this day, we toast St. Patrick every St. Patrick's Day with a drop of whiskey because he convinced the innkeeper to pour an extra large pour. I personally believe this story and I take it as fact, and I'm not going to be moved away from it. I'm going with it. I'm going with it.
The measure was so small it was non-existent. It was his imagination. Predicted the future. St. Patrick was actually he could predict the future.
Well, this is up there with these wonderful myths we hear about the monks who brought distilling to Ireland. Again, ignore the fact that the monks were in the 5th and 6th and 7th centuries, and by the time the 1300s rolled around, the monks, Con McNoise was gone by the time 1200s and 1300s came. The monks had already gone off to Iona in Scotland. They no longer were in Ireland anymore. But in any case, people love that story that the monks brought distilling to Ireland. It's as true as my story about St. Patrick ordering a double Jameson Black Barrel inside a pub back in 482. That's as true as that story is.
Double Black Barrel, please. Barkeep. Tony, yes, there are actually loads of distillery ghost stories. Barry, do you know any? I know a few.
I don't know of a single one.
No, distillery ghost. So there is the kind of belief that most distilleries have a ghost. I was told Bushmills had a ghost called the White Lady or Grey Lady. Can't remember. Used to appear. Hey?
Always a white lady.
Always a white lady. Always. I can't remember. I always got it mixed up if it was a white lady or a grey lady, because the Dark Hedges, if anyone's familiar with it, it's another kind of tourist attraction. Well, it wasn't until Game of Thrones. It's King's Road Game of Thrones. It has a ghost, and it's either the white or grey lady, and I can never remember which way around it was. But yes, there are apparently a few ghost stories to be told.
I have one last story, and it's less a kind of one story, but more an acknowledgement of a character that gets left out of stories in the history of Irish whiskey, and he gets overlooked. And last year, I put together a podcast with whiskey historian Fionnán O'Connor, and we released a 7-part podcast called The History of Irish Whiskey, and it's available on storiesandslips.com for our Whiskey Club members. And it's 5 or 6 hours of incredible insight into 800 years of Irish whiskey, or 700 years of Irish whiskey, or 1600 years of Irish whiskey if you bring St. Patrick into it. But it was a great chance to dive in and learn from a historian the real story of Irish whiskey. At the end of the 7 episodes, I got a message from the archivist, the historian at Midleton Distillery, Carol Quinn, great friend of ours, who is always great to perhaps point out where we might have missed a point, or there's an additional story to go with that, or Barry, you might not have known this, but there's also this aspect of history. So she's got so much history. But she said, Barry, I loved your podcast. And she said, I actually could not find fault in it, which is fantastic. First of all, that another archivist could listen and say, no, everything he shared was factual. But she said, I feel like you left out somebody. You left out somebody who had a remarkable role to play in the formation of Irish distillers, and that's a man called Kevin McCourt. And Kevin McCourt here, this is a book called My Dear Mr. McCourt. Kevin McCourt was the man that was brought in to create Irish distillers in the 1960s. He was a non-family member. He wasn't a Jameson. He wasn't a Powers. He wasn't a Murphy. He was, I suppose, one of Ireland's first professional managers, back when family businesses remained within families and sons and daughters ran the businesses. You didn't have an external manager. He was the professional manager class. And that was a new thing in Ireland in the 1950s and 60s. And Kevin McCourt came in and he used his insight, his vision, his intellect, his knowledge of business, his global vision for Ireland beyond the four walls of the island, looking overseas to develop the Irish Distillers Company. It was his idea to merge all distilling into one single plant. That idea was announced in 1969, opened the new Middleton Distillery in 1975. But there's some remarkable stories in this autobiography of Kevin, because it talks about all the various companies he worked with. Now, he was a director of 18 different companies over 35 years, but the companies he ran, either as chairman, CEO, or director, was a who's who of all the companies, the biggest companies in Ireland from the 1940s going up to the 1980s. Companies like Irish Distillers, Irish Steel, RTE, which is Ireland's television station, the equivalent of kind of an NBC, PJ Carroll & Co., which was a massive kind of a cigarette company in Ireland. In any case, he was a remarkable professional manager. And there's some stories in here shared about the decisions that had to be made when Irish whiskey was on its knees in 1966, 67, 68. They didn't know if it was going to succeed. There was all of these various brands, Powers, Jameson, Tullamore Dew, Paddy. What are you going to do with them? And so America was identified as being the target market. And it was Kevin McCourt's idea to come out with a new Jameson for the US market. And it's a remarkable story about how he had this vision for a new style of whiskey, which was moving away from pot still whiskey because nobody wanted it, to a lighter blended whiskey. And I want to read out a little snippet here from the book. And it said, after ensuring that the corporate plan was in place for the company in 1966, attention focused on the suitability of Irish whiskey for the US market. Kevin was clear that, quote, consumer taste may be influenced, but it cannot be bludgeoned. The reality was that consumer whiskey tastes had been swinging for some time towards lighter or less flavoured offerings. But to many Americans, Irish whiskey was a, quote, rough, heavy liquor with a spit and sawdust image. Kevin quoted one distributor as saying, take the boxing gloves out of your whiskey and I'll be able to sell it. Scotch producers had already launched a highly successful lighter product in the US, and US bourbon producers were planning to do likewise. By January 1970, Kevin was able to announce the spearhead of the onslaught into the US would be a, quote, modified Jameson, which would be test marketed in America in April or May. Quote, we haven't invented a Scotch and we haven't invented a bourbon, he declared. Instead, we've tailored an Irish whiskey to suit a light taste market. The US campaign was to be based not only on the new lighter Jameson, but also to feature the group's other principal brands, Tullamore Dew, Powers, and Paddy. Now, they brought all these to America, but Jameson American blend, the idea was, we'll blend this for the American market. That's what they're interested in. This is this lighter product. That one decision was probably the saving of the Irish whiskey industry. To come out with this, to have enough foresight to say, we've done looking insular, looking inside into our company and keeping our decision making about Ireland and how we've made whiskey for hundreds of years, but instead saying, no. What's the market drinking? What does the market want? And what can we do for it? And that gets followed up by a story here, how to do with that same whiskey. We can't find it here. But what he managed to do is, in addition to launching this in the US, because it was a new product, he was able to convince the Irish government that it was able to take advantage of special incentives for new products. Even though it was a Jameson, in a similar bottle than Jameson was released in Ireland. He convinced the Irish government it's an entirely new product. We should be able to take advantage of tax efficiencies and duty exemptions in shipping this out and save some money along the way. And in doing so, create great efficiencies in the company. When he took over the company, there were the number of cases of whiskey that were being sold in the US in 1969. 1969, there were 110,000 cases of Irish whiskey sold in the United States. At the same time, there were 15 million cases of Scotch. So that's from where we started in 1969, 110,000 to 15 million of Scotch. Last year, Irish whiskey in the US passed 8.5 or 9 million cases of Irish whiskey in the US alone. That's how far we've come. And I don't think we've even scratched the surface of where we can go. So Kevin McCourt, there's some great stories in here. If you can get hold of this book, you'd have to find it on Amazon or eBay. My Dear Mr. McCourt, but a remarkable insight into a man that doesn't get enough attention, doesn't get enough praise. So we're doing it now, praising him here. Well done, Kevin.
That's really interesting. That figure is mad. The difference versus then to now, like, you know, I mean, as you said, we're only scratching the surface. We're only getting started as to what's possible. More brands popping up, more distilleries being built. Like, listen,
honestly, it's amazing.
Yeah,
but absolutely. Everything that's happening now, the people we're meeting, the distilleries that are being built, the whiskies that are being released, little stories are being formed, and they'll be told in generations to come. And the more we can, I suppose, almost be aware of them when we're discovering them and understanding, like, the little stories that are going to lead to the great acorns. Like, we've probably had conversations with distillery owners and brand owners over the past few years where in 20 years we look back and say, I spoke to her when she hadn't yet launched in the US and her business just got acquired for 500 million. And you know what I mean? We're in such an early stage that it's just a remarkable time. I'm endlessly fascinated by the people and the places and the stories and the decisions that are made. And I'm looking forward to the books that are going to be written in 20, 30 years about the industry that we're in the middle of at the moment.
Well, funny you said that about the growth of brands. I met with Sarah Kennedy, brand manager of McConnell's, which I'm sure many in the chat will know. And she was saying when she started with McConnell's in, I think, 2020, it was, they were in 9 markets globally, and now they're in 50 in 3 years. Like, that's amazing. That's amazing growth. And at the minute, that's still a sourced whiskey. So you think how much more will be possible when they're actually distilling and producing their own whiskey and bringing people to the distillery, to their brand home. So listen, like, the growth of the industry it's not going to slow anytime soon. Put it that way. It's just
fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers absolutely. Crossed. We hope not.
Lauren, could you turn down your volume? Is small, but they're just getting a bit of feedback on the old microphone there. Rich wants to know what was so different about the Irish whiskey before 1969. So, Rich, in 1969, what Kevin McCourt inherited was a company that was making predominantly pot still whiskey, harsher than we might be familiar with today, a richer, heavier flavor profile than we're used to today. When a lot of the Scotch whiskey industry had transitioned towards blended whiskies, lighter whiskies, grain-based whiskies, corn and wheat predominantly based whiskies. Ireland was still predominantly relying on 100%, not 100%, but 90-odd% barley or 80% or 70% barley and a few adjunct grains. So we had this richer, heavier, as that distributor said, take the boxing gloves out of it, I'll be able to sell it, because it was considered just so robust and just not suited to the palate of the time. So the decision was made after the merger of Jameson Powers and the Murphy Distillery in Cork to move away from pot still whiskey as being the core product into a blended lighter whiskey, where you took some of the pot still whiskey, but you blended it with a lighter corn whiskey or wheat whiskey. And so Paddy moved from being a pot still whiskey to being a blend. Jameson did the same. Powers Gold Label did the same. And then Bushmills went from being, Bushmills was a malt whiskey and then eventually moved to a lighter blended whiskey. I don't know if you know when approximately they moved to a blend at all, but they did the same thing.
It was around the 1960s. So you're absolutely right. Like Bushmills Original used to be a malt, and then it became a blend in 1960 for the exact same reason Jameson did, was to appeal to a wider market and keep the price down as well, to kind of drive that one kind of singular SKU that really sort of was accessible to more markets and kind of interest to more markets as well. So yeah, follow the exact same path. Just have to work with the markets and what the kind of most desirable style was at the time. And anything, honestly, anything for sales back at that time. It was anything to get your whiskey moving.
John Teeling, the godfather of the modern whiskey industry in Ireland, talked recently at an event I was at about the stories we tell often about the demise of Irish whiskey in the 20th century, and how it was all of these external factors that contributed to the loss of distilleries and the decline of Irish whiskey brands. He said it was nothing to do with the external factors. He said we ruined it ourselves. He said we didn't look outside. We didn't care what the markets wanted. We stuck to what we thought we knew. We stuck to what we were making, and then we imposed strict tariffs and anti-export rules on our industry that brought it to its knees. So we can tell all these stories about prohibition and all these things, but the reality is we probably made a lot of very poor decisions as a country ourselves. Today, we're in this remarkable position where we look at whiskies or we look at releases, and I'm going to hold one up as an example, and it's here over my shoulder. It's Jameson Orange. You see it there. And a lot of people in the whiskey industry or whiskey consumers are like, oh my God, what an aberration. I can't believe that Jameson Orange is being released. That is an insult to me as a whiskey drinker. Well, let me tell you, one of the fastest growing segments within brown spirits is flavored whiskies, and peanut butter and orange and apple. And it doesn't matter if you don't like it, but if the market's already telling you that there's a market for it, you're a poor producer of spirits if you don't listen and feed a market that's got money in their hand, and they're already telling you what they're buying. And I think for many, many years, the Irish whiskey industry wasn't capable of doing that, didn't do it. And I think until Kevin McCourt came along, they didn't know how to do it. And so I think we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. We talk about standing on the shoulders of Jameson that's gone out into the world. Well, Jameson exists now today because of Kevin McCourt. So we must not forget his name. We must keep saying it.
I say this so many times, Barry, just on a point you made there about you can have your opinions of flavoured whiskies and so on and so forth. People will talk negatively, to be polite, about the likes of Jameson Original, Proper 12, the Jameson Orange, Proper 12 Apple. But the thing is, and how I view it and how I will always view it, nothing will change my opinion on this. If that is a way and a means to target either a younger generation who maybe are fans of Conor McGregor, or maybe are starting their whiskey journey and they want Jameson Orange and lemonade or something like that. If that is a way to bring a new generation and a new realm of people into the industry, their palate matures, they start trying different whiskies, they build up their taste, their flavor profiles, they sort of learn about different styles of whiskey. That's only a good thing. That can't be a bad thing. I've always said that, and I will always retain that opinion. That will never change for me. If it's a way to bring more people in and introduce them to Irish whiskey, it's a good thing.
It's the same for those whiskies that get released at maybe a price point that is not our price point. And it's such a subjective thing, but if I'm okay paying $100 for a bottle, and somebody else might only be okay paying $20 for a bottle, $100 bottle that I buy might be considered ridiculous to that $20 buyer. Nobody's wrong, but it's more what I'd like us to do less of as a group of consumers is to be critical of the existence of a thing at a higher price point than I can afford. So we're going to see some whiskies that are coming down the pipe in the next few weeks that are going to come out at big numbers. And I'm not going to criticize their existence because they fill a different gap or they fill a different need, or there's somebody out there who would drink a €5,000 whiskey as quickly as I drink a can of Coke. And that's fine. They should have an Irish whiskey for themselves if they want to do that. And if Irish whiskey hasn't filled those positions with an Irish product, then we're the idiots in the Irish whiskey industry for not having provided it. I remember having this conversation recently with somebody who had released a very expensive whiskey, and they were saying to me how they had to do it because nobody else was doing it, and they wanted to fill this kind of luxury end of the Irish whiskey market. And they were lamenting the fact that bigger companies had not maybe made the move before them to release these expensive, super premium whiskies, when obviously there was a segment in the world that could afford them. The Scotch whiskey market is full of them. Every duty-free in the airport has the 35-year-old and 40-year-old scotches at $4, $5, $6, $10, $20,000 a bottle. Where was Irish whiskey all the time? So it's only in the last few months or few years we've started to fill that gap, and long may it continue. I hope we see 5, 10, 20, 100,000 euro bottles of Irish whiskey, but I also hope we see €20, €50, €60, and everything in between. So a whiskey for everyone, and we're more likely to secure this industry for the next 40 or 50 years.
Exactly. Doug's made a great point there. He said, I work in a whiskey bar with over 1,000 whiskies available for sample, and flavoured whiskey has seen a huge uptake in the last year. I honestly believe, again, and we've said this so many times before, and it's another thing I'll continue to say, is there is a whiskey for every scenario you find yourself in. If you're in a bar, you're with your friends, it's coming towards the end of the night, no one's going to be buying a Redbreast 27 at 1 a.m. You're going to be drinking a Jameson and Coke. If you want a proper 12 apple with lemonade, whatever it may be, you want something that is easy, it's sociable, it's moreish. That's what you're after at that time of night. And actually, like on the whiskey bus, the most recent whiskey bus, Barry, one night you ordered a Jameson and Coke, and I was like, do you know what? Yeah, I'll have one. Why not? Because I do not drink any spirits ever with Coke. I've never been a fan, but it was in that moment I was tired after 7 days of drinking whiskey, and I needed just a sugar kind of hit, a little bit of a caffeine boost alongside the whiskey, and it was music to my ears. So genuinely, there is a whiskey with every purpose, every palate, every budget. If we're not producing whiskies for either end of the spectrum for people with a lower budget and a higher budget, as you said, Barry, we're doing something very, very wrong. We haven't listened to the customers.
I have great memories of dancing at a wedding after downing a good few shots of Crown Royal Apple, and being very happy. Like, I just thought, but I wouldn't have ordered. Like, it was one of only 2 or 3 brown spirits at a bar, and I thought, all right, listen, I've never had this. I loved it. That was great, brilliant. And so all you're doing is dance around the dance floor, listen, I think we can get very pretentious, like in the whiskey world, gatekeeping and putting rules in place that aren't rules made by anyone except ourselves, based on ego and exclusion, and I don't like them. So, and I'm going to do a video about this week. Just like, drink any whiskey any way you want, and let's just celebrate that there are whiskeys out there for everybody. And if we don't like a price point, or we don't like a whiskey, that's all right. Somebody else might, and not everything's for us. Like, I never fail to be amazed by people. I can understand when people feel like there's not value there, and everyone has the right to say, I don't believe this is value, and that's fine. Like, if you don't believe it's value, no problem. The market will ultimately decide if it is or it isn't. But like, I've never understood the, like running down the street chasing a Ferrari because it exists, like, how dare you, like, it's not for you, like, it's for somebody else, like, that's fine. And so I'm not going to take a crowbar to the case that's holding $100,000 whiskey because it exists. But I think, we should just be okay, and it's not all for us. Can't all be for us.
Like, I will not lie, I think I said this to you before, I really like Fireball. Hands up. This is my judged moment. If someone hands me a shot of Fireball at 1 a.m., I will not refuse it.
That's because you're all about fires. You love a few fires.
I love what?
You love a few fires.
Yeah. There's my third fire of the evening. Dublin Fire, Bushmills Fire, Fireball.
Lauren Fire McMullan.
There we are. That's going to be my middle name going forward. Listen, Fireball's great. I hadn't had it in so many years, until last year, actually, and I was out with, again, Sarah Kennedy and Jamie Cotter from Hinch, the brand manager from Hinch, and someone produced a tray of Fireball at our table. I don't know who it was. And I had a shot of it for the first time in probably 5 years since I was a student. And I was like, you know what? This is not the worst thing I've ever tasted.
All about context too, isn't it? Like the context really matters. Where you are, who you're with, what you're doing. Yeah.
It's not, I will drink it. It's not that bad. It serves a purpose. 1 a.m., finishing off the night. It's great.
Honestly, now you're giving me a thirst for a bit of Jameson Orange. And I think over the next day or two, the old Jameson Orange and 7-Up might have to be cracked out and enjoyed. We've said a lot. We've told stories. We've had a few sips. We've told tales. We've had a few tastes.
There we are.
Where do we go from here?
I'm sorry. I'm just amused at how many people, since we've said that flavored whiskey is not the devil and that I like Fireball, there's so many suggestions coming out here. Rich has said I have Fireball minis in the freezer. David said Fireball and a dry cider is like Magners and an adult apple pie. That sounds amazing. Listen, all of these drinks have a purpose and they have a time and place. So listen, I'm not mad about it.
It sounds like we're breaking down barriers. We're building bridges.
We are.
We're removing the gates and saying, "Come on in, folks." If it's brown, and it started, if it's brown, and at some point it was distilled, there's space at the table.
Listen, when I was starting my whiskey journey, I used to drink Bushmills Irish honey and lemonade, the sweetest drink you could possibly imagine. But listen, it got me into whiskey, so there you are.
Well, we should thank it. And here we are. We've said a lot. Folks, thanks for tuning in tonight. It's been a great night of stories and sips and tales and tastes. We're making stories and making, I suppose, crafting tales and collecting tales every time we have a conversation with somebody in the whiskey industry, and we're trying to extract the stories out of them. We're going to have a Meet the Maker event coming up in October with another great maker who's got some stories to share from their journey in the world of whiskey as well. And I'm keen to record these stories and make them available to all of you. And so we've almost 2 years of stories from these Meet the Maker events on our website, storieandsips.com, going all the way back to, I'll never forget the first night, and I'm sitting here at this desk in October 2021, and our first ever Meet the Maker event was with Mr. Brendan Carty, and founder of Kilbeg Distillery. And at that time, he had in his possession a barrel of whiskey that he had distilled 24 months prior, the second ever barrel of whiskey he'd ever distilled. I didn't know that 2 years later we'd be bottling it up and releasing it to a club full of people that bought this up in the space of a couple of days, and it sold out. Folks, you're an amazing group of people who I enjoy spending time with and chatting about whiskey. And I think we've got a great thing in common here. And so, look, thanks for all your support for the Shebeen and Irish whiskey and our whiskey experiences and the club. And just know that by talking about Irish whiskey, by telling somebody about it, by buying it instead of some of the other countries that produce whiskey, you're supporting independence, you're supporting families, you're supporting small companies that are really struggling with the costs, the increasing costs of resources, of inputs into their whiskey. So the more we can do to support them, the better. Your support is felt, it's known. I hear it when I talk to whiskey companies. They talk about the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club. They talk about the Irish Whiskey Fans of America Facebook community with great reverence and great kindness. And they say it's the nicest group of people they deal with across the whiskey world. So we should be proud and happy that we're all part of it. So we've all done that together. Matt Beach wants to know, is there a place we can submit our whiskey stories? Well, Matt, would they be suitable for children or not? Do you need to put like some kind of PG rating or 15s or 18s rating on them? I suggest you throw them into the Irish Whiskey Fans of America Facebook group, or you can put them in the contact form of Stories and Sips website if you want to, anonymously, and we'll share them back out if they're suitable.
They'll be all right. They'd be all right in Fans of America. I think they'd be suitable in there. I can't imagine there's many kids in that group. You'll be grand.
No. Yeah, I'd love to hear your stories. If you have good stories, let us know. And we're making more stories all the time. Every whiskey bus we have, every trip we have, every experience we have, we're gathering stories of great fun and crack and collecting great jokes along the way. Remind me at some point to tell you a great joke about a magician and a monkey that came from one of our whiskey bus guests.
Do you want to do it now? You said it now. You may as well do it.
It's another night. It's another night. We gotta spread the crack out.
Oh no!
Right. Folks, before you tune out tonight, would you click the like button on our YouTube stream? Just click the like button. That's all we ask, and that's it. We'll be sharing some more details of our whiskey club release from WD O'Connell this week online and via email, and announcing what's next coming soon. What have I missed?
That's it. We've covered all grounds. Covered Belfast. Covered stories. Covered releases. Covered sips. Sinead?
It does remind me that there's probably a market for one night, a kind of a drunk history night, right? Where have you ever seen Drunk History?
Am I being roped into another live stream here?
Have you ever seen the show in the US? It's called Drunk History, where people start drinking and they have to tell the story, like a historical story, but they're after like 15 drinks, but they're telling it, right? But famous people are actually acting it out, like Will Ferrell. They're all dressed in like period costumes, and they're like acting it out. But the person's like, it was, or what is it? I don't know what it was, like falling off their seats. But the funniest stories. I wonder, is there an Irish whiskey drunk history at one point?
Maybe this is a new. I think so. We'll maybe rope Anthony into the mix as well, and the three of us will do a bit of drunk history and JJ Sheehy's.
Maybe for the sake of brand positioning, we might leave this for an in-person event.
No cameras allowed.
Yeah. Suddenly the well of available casks for the whiskey club dries up from brands who want nothing to do with us. No more whiskies available. Sorry, Barry.
I was like, we saw that there. What, Shebeen? We're good. We don't want to work with you.
Well, people love the idea. I suspect the idea of it is far funnier than the actual execution of it, but who knows?
I still think we should do, I've said this to you a very long time ago, I still think we should do a Shebeen where I live stream from the pubs of Belfast and just you just follow me around virtually as I drink whiskey in various pubs.
It's kind of a stream of diminishing returns.
You can still do your whole usual Shebeen.
I mean, I can just picture now by 2:13 a.m. So like I can just picture you going, "You don't know my life," like
giving off down the camera. I think it'd be a good idea. I'd probably be kicked out about 12. In fairness, on a Sunday night in Belfast. That may be a problem, actually.
We never got a Lauren cam. We did promise to put a camera on Lauren for the whiskey bus. I have since bought a little mount for like a camera, I bought a mount for a backpack strap. So now we can actually put a GoPro on our camera or on our backpack strap, just walk into places and just be recording away, and nobody even knows, like a body cam.
We'll do it in Belfast. I'll do my typical Lauren's typical night out in Belfast. Lauren on the lash.
The challenge, like the idea of it is good. The challenge is the technological capabilities of it. It's like, imagine subjecting anybody to like an iPhone stream of 10 people in a loud bar at 1 a.m. and like, people, what is this? Like, why are we watching this garbage?
Listen, there's a lot of people on here have said they would. So, listen. We'll do it.
We'll keep brainstorming.
It might be snippets in quieter areas of said bars. We'll think about it. We'll think about it.
Yeah. I mean, there's been better ideas. But okay, so listen, folks, we leave it at that. Thanks a million for tuning in. Sinead, we'll be back next week with another. I think we'll be back next week. Yeah, we should be back next week. What's going on next week? No, we'll be back next week.
Next week, Will.
You'd wonder if for the upcoming birthday celebrations of Irish Whiskey Auctions, should there be some element of a live stream from Anthony Sheehy's pub in 2 weeks' time? We'll ask him if he thinks that's a good or a terrible idea.
Oh, that would be a good one. That would be a great one. Yes, I saw some people mention it at the start of the stream. I managed to get a bottle of the 2 stacks, which I really wanted. That's the one I really wanted, and I'm delighted.
I got some bottles too, Dunville's and a 2 stacks and a Killowen. I'm happy about those. But listen, look, folks, we'll be back to you when we've got more to share next week, and we'll see you in our Facebook community in the meantime, or on social media, on our Facebook groups, on Instagram, Stories and Sips, or Irish Whiskey Barry. I have recently taken to the old TikTok as well, so some of my stuff is shared on TikTok, which is going down a storm. That's where I got 60,000 views of this video about Redbreast, the Redbreast 10-year-old on TikTok. So I'm down with the kids. I'm figuring it all out. Next, I'll be dancing.
You were dancing. You were in the juke. The little one foot step. You'll have to repeat that.
On the bank, my Johnny said to me. Yeah, well, look, it's all ahead of us. It's all ahead of us.
Plenty of crack to be
had. I'm clicking the end stream button now, or we'll never get it. There'll be no beds gone to. Sláinte, everybody. Thanks a million for joining us, for your support. Click the like button. We love you all. We'll see you soon.
Sláinte.